Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson, Donald Trump says he wants to make a deal with Syria after years of crippling sanctions. So why now?
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.
Sanctions, well, they have been crippling Syria for years. So much so that when Donald Trump said they could be lifted, there was literal dancing in the streets of Damascus. And it's a lot to do with the country's newish president, Ahmed al Sharaa. He defeated former President Bashar al-Assad. He basically brought peace to Syria, but the group he led is a terrorist organisation, according to the UK, the EU and the United States. Not that this prevented President al Sharaa meeting Donald Trump during his Middle East tour. Clearly, a very significant moment for the region.
I am also ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria to give them a fresh start. It gives them a chance for greatness. The sanctions were really crippling, very powerful.
We spoke to our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn shortly before that get-together took place in Riyadh. Dom, so what exactly has Trump been saying about Syria?
Donald Trump has, it seems, succumbed to pressure and persuasion from the Turks and from the Saudis, but also from Syria's new leader, Ahmed al Sharaa himself, who reportedly has been trying to kind of court Donald Trump. It's been an interesting courtship because, of course, al Sharaa is someone with jihadist background. He had a price on his head, but he's seen in Donald Trump somebody he can possibly do business with. And reportedly, he even offered the possibility of a Trump Tower in Damascus and a kind of minerals deal between America and Syria, like the one that America signed with Ukraine. And combined with what the Turks and the Saudis have been doing as well, Donald Trump has been persuaded that he will lift all US sanctions on Syria. Now, they go back to 1979, and they've just got more and more oppressive for Syria. So the fact they've been lifted is a huge deal for Syrians, and Syrians have been out on the streets celebrating, and potentially we could see it sort of really transforming the entire region.
Okay, so Dom, can you put into context, I mean, what sort of effect have these sanctions had on Syria?
They've been crippling, and they've become more and more crippling. And Hafez al-Assad was the Ba'athist leader, the dictator who took over Syria in the late 70s. And the Americans immediately put sanctions on him, and they sort of tightened them as the 80s sort of showed Assad to be more and more oppressive. So they have targeted individuals in the regime, they've targeted finance, they've targeted and restricted the way Syria's been able to trade. And the critics of these sanctions have said that they've kind of pushed the Syrians more and more towards the Russians and Chinese and America's rivals in the region. And then under Bashar al-Assad, who started off as a reformist and saying he was going to open up Syria, and there was the possibility of sanctions being sort of eased at the beginning of his time in power. But as the Arab Spring brought discord and revolution and uprising to Syria, and that then led to a brutal oppression by the Assad regime and an outright civil war, under the Obama government and the Obama administration, the Americans have tightened sanctions even more. So what Trump is saying is he's not just going to sort of slowly let the pressure off, but he is saying, on the face of it at least, and what he said in Riyadh, is that those sanctions will be lifted in their entirety. And what he's saying is he wants to give Syrians a chance. I think he said, show us what you can do. And that's why they've been celebrating, I think, so enthusiastically overnight.
What, if anything, should we read into the involvement of, as you mentioned, Turkey and Saudi Arabia in bringing this meeting together?
Well, I think it shows a couple of things. I think, first of all, it shows that, the Turks and the Saudis see an opportunity here that they want to see. And it has to be said, the Turks and Saudis are, really quite intense rivals in the region. And, there's a lot of bad blood and at times acrimony between the two. But they have sort of found common cause with Syria, because what they see with Syria is an opportunity to transform the region. So if it can open up, if it becomes more like them economically, if not politically, then the region can be improved. And I think also what they've seen is a chance to kind of play to Donald Trump's philosophy of foreign policy, which is what we've seen in that speech yesterday and in this trip in the Middle East. Donald Trump sort of the philosophy of and the message of his foreign policy is basically, if you want to make the world a better place, you've just got to do business. You've just got to make deals. It's an extremely transactional and an amoral, not necessarily an immoral, but an amoral approach to foreign policy that he's bringing. And I think that what the Saudis and the Turks are saying is, if you believe in that, President Trump, then give Syria a chance, because, it does have this potential. It's a very well-trained, very well-educated country. It's been massively oppressed. It wants freedom. It wants to open up and engage with the rest of the world. So give it the chance to do so.
Ahmed al Sharaa is leader of a prescribed terrorist organisation, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. I mean, does that not bother Donald Trump?
I think Donald Trump is extremely pragmatic, and I think he doesn't hold these things against people if he can see the potential for progress. And most of all, can he see something in it for him and his greater glory, if you like. So as you say, Sharaa isn't just the leader of HTS, an organization that has been proscribed, has been regarded as a terrorist organization. His background is extremely murky, as you say. He went to Iraq to fight for al-Qaeda in Iraq. Has been regarded as a dangerous extremist jihadist for much of his life. There was a price on his head, but he has been rehabilitated. He's been to the Elysee Palace now to meet the French president, Emmanuel Macron. And the kind of carrot I think the Saudis and the Turks possibly are also dangling in front of Donald Trump is the possibility of Syria getting in on something that Donald Trump regards quite rightly as his greatest diplomatic achievement. And that's the Abraham Accords, the agreements between Israel and the Gulf nations to normalize relations, something that, as Donald Trump is at great pains to say, no one really thought was possible until he made it happen, along with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. So the Syrians have been talking in various ways about the possibility of joining that. Now, if that were to happen, that would utterly transform the region. If Syria was to have the same relationship with Israel as the United Arab Emirates and other Gulf nations, and ultimately Saudi Arabia, then you could see a completely transformed Middle East. Now, for Israel at the moment, that is a rather unsavory prospect, because they see Syria as a fractured nation, infested with jihadis and extremists and enemies of Israel, and they are extremely wary about its leader. So Netanyahu is going to need a lot of persuasion, and I think Israelis will as well. But there's a momentum to what Donald Trump does. He builds up this sense of inevitable success. That comes, I think, from his real estate background. He's brought that kind of hucksterism. His speeches are full of half-truths, falsehoods, exaggerations. But his whole philosophy is owning your narrative, never admit that you're losing, claim credit for everything, even if you've nothing to do with it, claim to be a winner. And that does it it gets a momentum and acquires a momentum of its own. And therefore, it kind of drives forward this sense that he's succeeding in the region. And clearly the Syrians want to be part of that. And I think ultimately the Israelis will not be able to stand in the way.
Sure, but isn't that dragging of the heels of some of the regional players as to whether or not Syria can re-enter the international community? I mean, this was a guy who was very closely allied to and sponsored by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of Islamic State, whose death Donald Trump ordered back in 2019.
Yeah, and he's also something of a chameleon, al Sharaa. He comes from a middle-class background in Damascus. He then sort of transformed into an al-Qaeda jihadist in Iraq, and then he sort of transformed again, mutated into a freedom fighter back in Syria. He's an extremely pragmatic man. So at times where his own movement has seemed to be too extreme, he has shifted and been fairly ruthless in the way he's rooted out elements that he has considered uncongenial to foreign support for his movements. As HTS sort of swept to victory in this very surprising sort of whirlwind advance on Damascus, and it took Aleppo, he put in charge there a Christian governor. So he's got a pragmatism, and he's clearly impressed those foreign leaders he's met. And he says that he's looked very closely at what's happened in recent revolutions in the Arab Spring, but also revolutions in history, and learnt from the lessons of those revolutions. And I think what he's trying to say to other leaders is that he is the real thing. He can transform Syria. In a sense, his extremism the hardcore sort of jihadist credentials he had in the past is in a way attractive because it means that he can deliver, at least to some extent, those jihadists who would be very queasy about any kind of deal with Israel. That's certainly, I think, his sales pitch, but there's a huge way to go before that's going to happen.
But there are concerns, aren't they? Legitimate concerns about what has been taking place in Syria since the new president came in.
There has been some brutal moments and some egregious acts of attacks on minorities in Syria. In his defense, I think Sharaa will say that he has to do what he has to do to stay in charge. But, I think the jury's still out as to whether he can hold this nation together. Syria as a country is divided between the areas he controls, but also the areas the Kurds control and other areas which really aren't controlled by anybody. So if he wants to deliver Syria in any sort of form as a country that can then do business with the outside world, he's got a lot more to do. And the tension there for him is doing that in a way that isn't going to end up with sort of trampling on the human rights of many of his own people, ending up with massacres. And I think there are also doubts as to how much control he has over his own forces and over the forces of the militias he's trying to co-opt into a sort of united Syrian military under his command.
This meeting, when it takes place, and in whatever form it takes place, will be the first meeting between the President of the United States and the President of Syria since, I think, back in the Bill Clinton days. So it is a moment of significance. What do you think we are learning, Dom, just in broad terms, about where Donald Trump's Middle East policy is going and going next?
I think what we're going to see is an American president trying to do business with whoever he can in the region. What we heard very explicitly from Donald Trump yesterday was a total rejection of America's sort of past neoconservative misadventures in the region, but also this sort of philosophy, which he has no time for really, that America as a democracy can teach others how to run their own countries. He said that the Americans have tried to teach others to do something that they don't really understand how to do themselves. It's all about doing business. It's all about nation states within their own sovereign borders becoming richer and then dealing with each other in a kind of healthy competition. He sort of believes his MAGA approach to the world can be matched with the sort of bling of the Gulf in this sort of marriage, which will just produce untold wealth for both sides. That might work in the Gulf. It might work in the part of the Middle East that he's in now. Beyond that, though, it could be a lot more problematic.
Dom, just finally, and obviously an awful lot rests on what happens over the next 24, 48 hours, but given what is happening with Ukraine, given Donald Trump's actions on Syria and the frostier relationship the United States now has with Israel, I mean, are we at the point of saying that there is method in the madness of Donald Trump's foreign policy?
Oh, I think so. I think it can be boiled down to this sort of simple slogan. If he wants to have a bumper sticker for Donald Trump's foreign policy, it would be, if you want the world to be a better place, just do business and make deals. Because in his mind, if each country does that and gets richer within its own borders and then trades with other countries in a very sort of competitive way, then you're going to have all countries getting more prosperous and then the world will become richer. And I think he would hope more peaceful. The problem with that, I think, for the Ukrainians is that although he's done this deal with the Ukrainians in terms of their minerals deal, he obviously sees a greater prize with Russia. For Europeans, Ukraine is, and the victory that they hope Ukraine will eventually have over Russia's invasion, that is essential not just to Ukraine's security, but also to European security. Americans simply don't see it that way. They have been talking about Ukraine as being an irritant and possibly causing World War III and a real threat to what they see as eventually they want to see better relations between America and Russia. And Donald Trump's being sort of seduced to some extent by the Russians saying, get this war out of the way and you can do business with us. We have this huge amount of hydrocarbon wealth and there's a lot of money in it for both of us. And clearly he's seeing, at the moment, the possibility of talks between Russia and Ukraine as the most immediate goal. And he's trying to put pressure on both sides. But as I think in the minds of the Ukrainians, he's not doing enough to put pressure on Moscow to really, for Vladimir Putin to come to Istanbul and sit down with President Zelensky and start making peace. And certainly not doing enough to make Russia agree to this 30-day ceasefire.
Dominic, we will be speaking again tomorrow around, of course, that summit taking place. For now, thanks very much. That's your lot for this edition of The Daily. We are back again tomorrow.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews,
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
for Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.